Welcome to ReReview, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we have an immense love for the films of our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we are discussing Three Amigos. It was released in 1986, directed by John Landis. It stars Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short. This movie tells the story of out-of-work actors whose on-screen adventures are now real-life adventures. This is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 35-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be talking about key plot points. This is Bobby's choice, so he'll open up our discussion.
Yeah, I thought this would be fun to take a look at and re-review because it's been quite a while since I've seen it, and I do remember just enjoying it. I thought that it had a pretty clever idea, like something that I hadn't really seen too much about, essentially like the out of work actors kind of, like it's kind of like a very interesting, like almost like a redemption type of story to me. Like, like, oh, maybe in the beginning they're very arrogant and self-centered and joking about, oh, like, what are you going to do with the money? Oh, I'm going to buy myself a bunch of stuff, and joking about charity and stuff like that. And I feel like, okay, maybe they do make a better change, which I think is very interesting. But I mean, overall, I thought it was pretty funny, and I mean, I enjoyed it for the most part. What did you guys think?
I will be honest, I have only seen this movie one other time, and that was on TV.
How long ago?
Oh no. Y2K-ish. I was probably in high school at the time.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I only saw it on TV as well.
I mean, it was definitely, I was only a baby when this came out, so I definitely didn't watch it in theaters. And I don't know if they ever really did much of a re-release. And it's weird because on the surface level, this movie, it's kind of a weird thing because it's definitely an SNL movie from the cast and the writing, because I'm pretty sure Lorne Michaels was involved in the production of this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's different than the SNL movies that I think of, because I'm used to like Night at the Roxbury, level movies that came out in like the 90s. And so this was kind of like the pre-SNL, movie, and it wasn't bad. It was actually a fairly competent movie, especially for the time. So that being said, like, if you would have asked me about it, I probably would have skipped it if it were out in theaters back in the day. If you would have showed me the trailer, I probably would have not paid much attention to it. But watching it again, I definitely appreciated a lot of the humor. I had forgotten more than I remembered, to be honest, but I did remember a lot of the more memorable quotes. So those I did remember, and a few of them I was like, oh yeah, that was from this movie. I'd completely forgotten. I thought it was from Blazing Saddles or something, so it was kind of like an interesting chance to rewatch and kind of re-experience it again.
Yeah, you mentioned Blazing Saddles, and there was so much about this being kind of like a Western in a campy and very cheesy way that definitely had me laughing. I think it sounds like amongst the three of us, I probably have watched this the most. Now, I'm not saying I've seen it within the last 10 years, but I definitely feel as a kid, I was playing this over and over. This is a film that I somehow enjoyed. And as an adult, there was definitely jokes that I missed as a kid. But for the most part, it was kind of not too bad from stuff. I think, we watched a lot of these movies from the 80s, and I always come in going, oh boy, we're going to see some stuff that just does not stand up in 2021. This could fall under that for certain reasons, but at the same time, it's I was laughing the whole time. All those little things that you mentioned, those memorable quotes, I still found it funny. And I think when you're dealing with, especially Steve Martin and Martin Short, like between the two of them, it's I want to say comedy gold. It's just good how they tie it in. That's me, giving a little bit of not praise to Chevy, but he did all right. He did all right.
Well, it was strange because as I was watching this, having just recently watched some National Lampoon movies, it's almost like a watered down Chevy Chase in this movie, strangely enough. Like, he doesn't really come off like, there's still Chevy Chase in his brand of comedy, but he doesn't really go to the 11 like he usually does. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that was the director Landis, kind of paring him back a little bit. in a way, it almost kind of made his character a little bit less memorable.
Yeah.
He didn't stand out as much as a result. And again, I don't know if that was his choice, if that was a Landis choice, if it was just the character itself didn't really warrant it. But I did find that interesting, having watched National Lampoon, where it's just peak Chevy Chase, and then watching this.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing, it's pretty clear that it's, I want to say, homaging like old westerns. Like, we mentioned Blazing Saddles, but I think it's like trying to spoof maybe even some of the really old like TV serialized type stuff, like Gunsmoke and those kind of things, and
Oh,
even into like the 50s and 60s, like those kind of westerns where they're outdoors and it's clearly like they're in a set. Like
That I'm not gonna lie, I love that scene so much because it just cuts and you could tell the sky is fake, you could tell the rocks are fake, and they're just hanging out. And even as a kid, I remember going, "Wow, that looks like a set," and even now it still does.
The weird thing to me was, until that moment, as I was watching it, it felt like a fairly, I don't want to say realistic approach to the movie, but up until that point, it would, for the most part, was real world. But as soon as it hit that scene, between that, the singing bush, and the invisible swordsman or whatever, like, it just went in this weird direction where all of a sudden it just went to this weird, goofy, fantastical thing for that moment. And then there's a few more elements later on, but it never went as crazy as that again. But it was just this weird segment right there in the middle.
Were they just looking for comedy filler? Is that, because you're right? I mean, if you think about it, why was this kind of fantasy portion thrown into the middle of the film? Because that is the distinct part where it's like, oh, we have instructions that we've received how to find El Guapo, and then it's all the craziness. It's the fake set followed by find the singing bush and talk to the invisible man, and it's like, wait a second, but you were just out of work actors in Hollywood. Why is this all of a sudden acceptable part of this world that a singing bush and an invisible man exist?
It was so strange because the first thing I thought of during that little segment I had mentioned, that bookend or whatever, was like Holy Grail. Those kind of like movies where it just goes to this very outlandish thing for the gag, with there's no payoff, there's no real reason for it to happen. It just happens. I legit was looking if they were like smoking something during that scene, and they just went kind of crazy there.
I mean, and they take you through the process. You get to see the singing bush. You get to see the unfortunate fate of the invisible.
I'm not gonna. That got me. I'd forgotten about that. So like when that came up, I legit like lost it. And then the follow up, were holding up the wrist and then dropping it and getting the little dust plume on the ground. It was so good,
so good, so good.
So. So for the most part, it sounds like we've been saying some pretty good things, but Austin, it kind of seemed like there was what's kind of a negative that rewatching it kind of came up.
Well, I mean, we are looking at the world differently these days for a lot of things that make sense. And the story is based around three actors who were acting in movies where they played white characters coming in to save Mexican villages, essentially. And, they go from doing that in these sort of black and white, old school style films where they have the person playing piano and all that, to, because it takes place in 1916, I think is what we said.
Yeah.
To then them just acting that out in real life, to the people. What's the name of the town again?
You mean the name of the town?
Yeah.
Santo Paco.
Santo Paco.
Paco.
Looking for some kind of refuge, looking for help, and they can't find help amongst their own people. They see a movie clip and says, "Oh, those are the ones who can save us." And then they come and do it. Now, it was a little bit better because it wasn't single-handedly them. And it was the character arc that you mentioned, Bobby, in terms of them being selfish and, running away at one point, then, coming back and saying, we need to be better than this type of thing. But it still took the whole village to defeat the mighty El Guapo. But it's just one of those It's just one of those things where it's the stories that everyone's been we've watched these tales many, many, many times before.
Yeah, it's the standard because they use it in like the Kurosawa films and stuff like that, right? Like The Fortress and stuff like that. Seven Samurai, right? It's very Seven Samurai.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is like almost a direct spoof of Seven Samurai. At least some of it is. Yeah, or the Western version, which was the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing that I remember thinking, and I think I brought it up while we were watching, is like, one, in the final scene, where did all the villagers get the guns from? And then, like, why did they really need to, why did they need help in the first place if they had no problems, just massacring the banditos or whatever? um, the the one thing that while we were watching it, especially like as they entered the village and everything, I started really thinking about, and it's not a one-to-one relation, but it really reminded me of Tropic Thunder. The idea of actors having to be what they pretend to be in a real life scenario. And it was such a one-to-one in some points. Not necessarily the final act or anything, but it definitely had very reflective points that reminded me of that.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to my mind is just like the history of like the portrayal of non-white characters in film a lot of times, and in this case it was a lot of like Mexican people, and unfortunately a lot of times they're just stereotypes, and that's all you ever see is they're just a representation of like just a stereotype. And it's kind of disappointing that some of the characters weren't a little bit more fleshed out. I mean, the one thing that I thought was a little bit good is that the main character, who was the woman, she wasn't just like the sexual love interest, then. And I thought there was a little bit more to her, where even in the end she kind of it was like, oh, the cliche would have been for her to like fall into the guy's arms or whatever, but it was a little bit funny at the end how she kind of backed off, and they played against that type, but a lot of times they were just playing too type.
I will give them credit, at least the fact that many of the cast members in the village and in the bandits, whatever, were Hispanic actors. I legit, before this movie started, thinking 1986 comedy movie, I was kind of worried I was gonna see some actors that were of the lighter skin tone, with some darkening powder on their faces or something. I was kind of worried that was going to happen, and maybe it did to some extent, but at least the main ones all seemed to come from Hispanic origins, which was surprising and refreshing at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was thinking the exact same thing. It's kind of interesting to look back on how, as a kid watching it, there's none of these things were crossing my mind. So now you kind of put it into, again, today's perspective of like, what would you do differently trying to make a film like this today? Is it Tropic Thunder?
Ooh, that's tough. Like I feel like this movie would almost even fall into the category where you just can't do it. It seems easy to say that about a lot of movies from earlier or whatever, but I just don't think that you could really make a movie like this. Not that it's not Blazing Saddles. It doesn't go into a territory that you definitely couldn't make it. And I know some people will fight against that you can't say that a movie couldn't be made, like you adjust it to the time. But I don't know. I don't know if you really could do this movie nowadays, to be honest.
I mean, could you do it from the perspective of like, okay, like they come in kind of like how they do, but instead, I mean, it would have to be some kind of like comedy or parody or some kind of thing like that. But like they come in like they do, thinking, oh yeah, we can go in and save them, and then they go and realize like maybe like what happened halfway through the movie is like, okay, they can't save them, and then figure something else out, like like instead of like them being so much the focal point throughout the second half of the movie.
I'm thinking about it. I wonder if it was done more in the vein of Galaxy Quest, in the sense that there's at least a moment of realization where the villagers know that they're complete frauds. Like almost like they're not, maybe if they didn't understand
You nailed it.
that they were actors, you know. And I get
Mhm.
there is that moment after the village is destroyed, but that to me that was more just disappointment that they ran away rather than that they were just actors. Like
Mhm.
I still don't know if the villagers by the end of it understood that they were just acting in those movies. I don't know if
Which
they
is
really got it.
really unfortunate. You know, the idea that they're presenting films, and you know, it was only two characters that actually saw the film, and their reaction to it was, "Oh, this must be real life."
Right. Well, I mean, they did show like they did preface it by showing the Model A or Model T or whatever it was driving down the street and them looking at it like, wow, look at that newfangled thing. It's a car.
Mhm.
So I think they kind of showed like, oh, look, like here's a subset of people that are maybe not too familiar with things like cinema and cars and things like
Which
that.
again, that's I guess where the idea if there would have been that moment, because I would actually you had made a statement earlier that there was an arc to the characters, the three amigos themselves, and I don't know if there was an arc so much as there was just a turning point for them.
Right.
Like
I was
there was
right
a
as you
flip,
were
but
saying that.
it didn't
Yeah.
really like occur naturally. It just kind of seemed like after, and it was just really Ned, right? His character had just this flip, and that would just kind of was the turning point.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't know, maybe it was a good enough reason, but I don't know, maybe they didn't really establish it well enough and have it arc well enough for
I
it to
don't think
really
they
be sold.
established it well enough. I mean, like basically, like they got fired from one movie studio. Are there not others? I mean, like I don't think they showed that they were. I mean, they took their clothes and they talked about like, oh, we don't have clothes, we don't have a house. Like the movie studio gave them everything, but are there not others? Are there not like theaters? Like I didn't see them being completely destitute and thinking like, okay, like like I didn't really see the reason for them to
I hear
go
us
back
saying
to the village.
we want like a 2 hour, 2.5 hour version of this film. Is
2 hour
that what
cut.
we're doing?
There was a lot of deleted scenes apparently on the Blu-ray version that,
Oh, really?
apparently it had a completely different opening where like you actually got to see El Guapo actually attack the village, which was the inciting incident to get them to go watch the movie.
So some more
Um,
setup.
yeah, a lot more setup. I mean, the call to action was literally a telegram showing up right in the moment where they're kicked out of the studio. So we were denied any of the moments that Bobby is talking about, where
Mhm.
we could have seen them become super desperate, or even drive home. Their personalities. Even like we were, like that little negotiation scene with the studio head was about the only real character development we had before the call to action happened.
Mhm.
And it was really just Steve Martin's character, Lucky. So
But see, I'm hearing that you both care enough to want to know more about these characters.
I as a film watcher, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. Um, and maybe it's asking too much for a 1986 comedy from Lorne Michaels, maybe, but yeah, I think there could have been a little bit more. I definitely think that there should have been some sort of conclusion. I think to me there was two story elements that were kind of left hanging or were really I don't know what you would say, matured enough. One being the Germans. I
Mhm.
didn't I don't think they were even really necessary to the story, to be honest. If you removed all the German stuff, it's just the plane. The plane was the only reason why they existed.
You got a little bit of backstory on Ned.
Yeah, but I mean, that could have been one of the bandits.
It could have been, yes.
The Germans weren't really all that needed, but the other one was just the whole idea of the studio. Like I was kind of thinking that maybe and if this movie was made now, it probably is how it would end, is after they ride off in the sunset, they would, the Three Amigos Return would be like their movie or something, because now they're more confident and they're better people or something, right?
Mhm.
But they just go off in the sunset, which is classic spaghetti western shot. But for this movie, it might have made a little bit more sense to go back to the studio and see that wrapped up, because they're still out of work actors riding off on horses in the middle of the desert with no sense of direction. Did they make it? I don't know.
So how would you picture that? They go back to the studio and then the studio says, "Oh, we'd love to have you back." And then do they go back or do they not because now they have a newfound sense, or like or do they go back with a higher purpose?
I think that if Matt is traveled back in time to 1984, 1985 when they're writing this, I would have had the legend of what they did become widespread. And so there's revived interest in the Three Amigos, which kind of seemed like is a waning franchise. Not too different than how Galaxy Quest ended, to be honest. That's exactly how Galaxy Quest ended. They were reinvested in the franchise themselves, and because of the events that happened, there was a new series that kicked off. And to me, that's kind of how what you could have done if you're really interested in wrapping up that storyline. But I guess once they got done with all the jokes, there was no real reason to.
Like, this movie is over.
And
That's pretty much it was.
Some of their new series proceeds goes to help, villages in trouble.
Okay, we have taken this down a path. That's a charity line from earlier in the film. Even though he said homeless kids for that one. I'm going to pivot away. Let's talk about the music.
Away. Oh,
Randy Newman. How do we feel about the music?
I loved it. I thought it was great. I mean, I think the songs are really catchy. I mean, Randy Newman to me is just really good in general. Like obviously he's more recently become more popular with a lot of the the Pixar stuff, like Toy Story, and I'm pretty sure he's winning Oscars for Toy Story and Monsters Inc. and that kind of stuff. But I thought the music was really catchy, and I like the music with words, and I also like the score. I thought the score was pretty good too.
Yeah, I mean, so many horns. I kept hearing horns everywhere, and it was fantastic. But My Little Buttercup, so good. And the theme song's even good. The Ballad of Three Amigos. It's freaking fantastic.
It's so weird because, again, I hadn't watched this movie in forever, and the only time was on TV. I remember those songs, but I've forgotten that they came from this movie. The quality of the songs almost supersede the movie itself in a way.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like they're songs that probably had existed before that.
I thought they did. I thought they did. It's interesting that they did not.
Yeah, it was a surprise for sure. I mean, I would be interested to know if there was any sort of award nominations for the score or the original songs.
Well, given how much money it made, sounds like, yeah, I don't think anyone was giving it recognition. We had a brief discussion that this is pretty much not favored by the big critics at the time.
I mean, the critics, like I said at the beginning or whatever, like had I seen the trailer for this, I probably wouldn't have really gone to watch it in theaters. And it seems like a lot of people didn't. I was surprised to see the reviews at the time. I think it was like 5.2 out of 10 from like, film critics and stuff. And you can always argue that film critics have their own, special approach to these kind of movies or whatever. They're not necessarily most favorable towards comedies. But I'm surprised that it wasn't financially successful. But I guess that kind of put it into the cult classic, because how often are successful, well-known movies cult movies? It's almost always the flops and the ones that went under the radar that become cult classics.
So here we are, 2021. How do we overall feel about the film? So Bobby, are you taking this one and telling people to watch it?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it, and I think, like we just have been doing, I think it's a good conversation piece. I mean, I don't think it's super like the funniest movie you've ever seen or anything, but I do think that it's clever, and I enjoyed it, and I could maybe like if I'm doing something else, have it on in the background kind of situation, but I enjoyed it, and I think it would be fun to watch.
Just be singing along while you're doing chores.
Right, exactly. I'm probably going to be singing along regardless anyway.
Matt, how do you feel about it?
Before I answer that, I need to know, this movie or Blazing Saddles? Which would you choose?
What am I doing here? Like, what is this, a gun to my head? I have the only two movies I can ever watch ever again?
Yes.
Wow.
I need to know.
This one is so I almost want to say quaint in comparison, like a much safer choice in terms of how bombastic it gets, especially with those ideas. Again, it feels a little bit Blazing Saddles, but it is not Blazing Saddles. So if I'm going, I gotta pick Blazing Saddles.
Wow.
Bobby?
Off the top of my head, I was gonna say Blazing Saddles also, but I mean, I would miss the music here. I'd still be singing My Little Buttercup and
Blazing Saddles is so ridiculous. What are you doing, Matt? What's your choice then?
Between the two of them, I would go Blazing Saddles. But I do think that this movie, my opinion about this movie is I think it's a good movie. It's competently made for the most part. I don't think I'd go out of my way to watch it, but I think that if I had a couple buddies over and we had some drinks, I think it's an entertaining movie to watch in that environment. I don't think that I would, necessarily click it if I was scrolling through a streaming platform. I probably would choose Blazing Saddles if I wanted to really get a good laugh in.
Yeah, I mean, Blazing Saddles, your stomach's gonna be cramped up because there's just so many beats to that movie that have you dying. But I found myself laughing. Like I said, it definitely, sometimes we watch these films and you wonder how much the nostalgia trip hits you, and this one hits me really hard, just in that nostalgia, feeling like a kid again, watching just some shenanigans, with these three guys who were so quintessential for comedy during this time. So I totally enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. Notwithstanding all the things we talked about, understanding the world as it is today, but it's still funny and it's still worth watching. So I will definitely give a thumbs up to recommend checking it out, even if it's on streaming. So as always, we'll say thank you for listening, and good night, Ned.